Thank you so much, Max. We are now coming to the second part of this evening, which will be in English. I hope that's fine for everybody. My name is Alina Buchberger. I'm a dramaturg here at Kampnagel, and we have to discuss the topic of plurality, of course, two more wonderful panelists, which I'm going to introduce first of all. Next to Max is sitting Leyla Jagiella, who is an ethnologist and religious scientist. She has been working at the Chair for Islamic Cultures of the Present at the University of Bayreuth in the research network Gender, Queer, Intersectionality and Diversity Studies. She's currently working in different projects with LGBTQIA refugees and is also a freelance journalist and author. And I think your book is being published in 2021 and which will be called Amongst the Eunuchs, a Muslim Transgender Journey. In her research, she's focusing on gender and sexuality in diverse Islamic contexts with a focus on South and Southeast Asia, more specifically India, Indonesia, and Pakistan. Leyla Jagiella is also an activist and speaking from a Muslim and trans perspective in different initiatives in Germany and internationally. And thanks to her knowledge of Arab love poetry, Leyla has been part of the harmonious project here at Kampnagel in 2015 and was also invited in 2019 to the performative magazine about queer Muslim subcultures, which was called We Mochtalefs. I'm so happy to have you here. Welcome. And our third panelist is Perel, right next to me. What an honor. Perel is an interdisciplinary artist whose work is centered on disability and queerness as they relate to care, consent, sexuality, and personal and historic trauma. Perel uses choreography to examine power exchange between the artist and the audience. Their recent work, Life Unworthy of Life, a queer descript talk show, premiered at No Limits, which is a disability-centered festival in Berlin in 2019 and is now touring to Kampnagel here for the Tage der jüdisch-muslimischen Leitkultur. So you can all see the show from tomorrow on and until Saturday if you are interested. There will also be a live stream on Friday. Perel has received numerous residencies, commissions, and awards, most recently the Beth Silverman Yam Award for Social Justice at Gibney Dance in New York, and the first International Artist in Residence for Disabled Dance Artists at Sophienseele in Berlin. I'm so happy with all the effort it took to make Perel travel from New York to here in the middle of this pandemic. Thank you for being here, Perel. So we were discussing briefly before entering the stage together how to start off with this conversation on a day which is a difficult day because it is only 2 days from the 9th of October, which will mark the first year after the attacks in Halle on the synagogue. And we have just on Sunday had an attack in front of the synagogue, Churweide, here in Hamburg, on a Jewish student. So we wanted to take off the conversation by talking about art and resistance, because these are spaces we need to discuss these topics, but we also want to acknowledge that this is the present we live in, and maybe take the opportunity today to talk about resistance, but also have this in mind for this discussion. So do any of you want to share something about this, or should I start off with my question about art?
Well, thank you. Thank you so much. Great to have you all here. I think there was one story I wanted to share about that, because I feel like what we're talking about a lot when those things happen, and last year was a horrible year for that. I mean, so much stuff has happened since last year that it feels like, I mean, it's mind-boggling, right? It's really almost falling out of my head that, like, right, this stuff also happened. It's not even a year ago. And a lot of discussions that happen after an attack is always about protection. How can we protect people? How can people protect themselves? And I think, I mean, that is important. And I went to a Jewish school for 13 years, and I had fences there and 5 policemen, and maybe that's one of the reasons nothing ever happened there, right? And at the same time, I feel like there's something that is getting out of focus if we keep on talking about protection only, and that is resistance and self-definition and empowerment and all those things that we may do in art. And maybe we should do in art. And maybe that's what art is for, right? And I remember after Hanau, I was supposed to do a critique of a show called Hunters, which is about Jews taking, not only Jews, a lot of people taking revenge on German Nazis living undercover in the States. That's like a very small synopsis there. And they called me, the radio station was like, do you think it's appropriate to do a critique of a show like this one day after Hanau happened? And I was like, I couldn't think of any better day than that. Why? Because I feel like, I mean, I'm like, I know from my own family and from myself that the feeling of pain that comes with being a victim and being threatened doesn't only lead to calm and feelings of fear, but it also leads to feelings of anger and revenge and frustration and violence. It's almost like the violence that's been inflicted on you is something that you want to give back. And I feel like maybe art, and that'd be an hypothesis for tonight, art may be the only place, and art including music and all of that, may be the only place where you can find a place for those feelings.
I can say, in speaking to that, Max, that in my work, when I think about care as a disabled person, I try to always sort of flip the narrative of care is being given to the disabled person by the non-disabled person in this unilateral hierarchy. So I'm always trying to flip that and make it so that the power relationship is actually put into question. And part of that is a critique. I mean, if I'm putting that in like a delicate artistic way to make it sound nice. But actually, it's revenge. And yeah, it's because I not only want to experiment on non-disabled people and how they really feel about me and my body, but I also want that to be witnessed by an audience so that the audience can question themselves at the same time. And if I didn't have that violent impulse, I don't know what my art would even be, actually. So, but at the same time, doing that within the space of art, it's like a ritual in the sense that it's an event that has a beginning and like and a middle and an ending, and a space that you enter and you leave. And it's very different than having to deal with violence in everyday life. And, you know, I guess what I mean is I sublimate what I would really like to do to people sometimes in my work in a way so that there is a critique that maintains a safety and an integrity between people. And I care about that because I can't, if I have been treated unethically, I can't then go treat somebody else unethically. It's like my responsibility to correct that.
I was just thinking whether I can or cannot relate to what you two have just described because, well, first of all, I'm not an artist as such. I don't do art performance or something like that. What I do mostly in my work is highlight art. So I deal with art as a production that helps us deal with these things a lot. But I don't produce it myself. I'm more you know, I'm a researcher. I look for these elements of beauty that help us resist. The other thing is also, I checked your age of birth before this event actually and realized that I'm 7 years older than you. And you mentioned that terrible time in the 90s when these horrible racist attacks happened, and then the reaction of the German government to that, and so on and so on. And of course, being 7 years older, I had a bit more, maybe a bit more conscious experience of what was going on at that time. And I have to say that at this point in our German history, I feel very much burned out by anger. Because I was already fucking angry in the 90s, and I've been angry throughout. And what's happening to us in recent years, beginning with the big success of the AfD and Hanau and Halle and things that are happening almost every day. You know, we can talk about the big attacks. Of course, they have shocked us the most, but every day something happens. You know, some synagogue, some mosque finds a swastika graffiti in the morning on their walls or something like that. A woman with a headscarf is being attacked. Refugees are being attacked, so on and so on. So it happens all the time. And I feel like, oh my God, we've been warning this society of this since ages already, with anger, with fear, and everybody else has been telling us that, yeah, well, but no, not in Germany, and no, we won't have a right-wing populist party in Germany. We're not like the Dutch or the Austrians or something like that. No.
Or like
we
the
know.
Americans.
Well,
I mean,
yeah.
look at. I mean, I won't be there for the elections strategically.
Yeah.
So I'm with you. That's all. I just needed to say in a cheeky way, or like the Americans,
No,
because
definitely.
we're all having to
Definitely.
contend
I mean,
with it. Yeah.
in the US as well, you have this discourse of, I hear that a lot now, nowadays, that people say, oh, what has happened to our country, you know? I mean, what does that even mean? It's a country that has a history of slavery, of genocide, so on and so on. You know, and in Germany, we have something very similar. We have somehow this talk about a Rechtsruck, but the issue has always been there. So at this point, and I know that you're very much aware of that. You're writing a lot about that as well. So, but with regards to, okay, how do I resist to that? I don't look so much for revenge anymore because I don't have that much power for revenge anymore. I get angry, but I also feel burnt out by it at the same time. I just try to look at the little, the crooks and the little glimmers of beauty in between that we can highlight so that this narrative does not kill us all the time.
Well, yeah, thank you. I do not, I totally agree. I do not believe that revenge is available. I mean, even if I wished, there's like, it didn't, like, when I started looking into that whole matter, I felt like, isn't that interesting that you find radical movements on all kinds of groups that experience discrimination? You got Black Panthers, you got radical feminism, like the cut off their dicks feminism, that kind of stuff. And then on the Jewish side, you just don't find that. And I was like, how is that? Like, so something like this happens, and then 1945, what actually is the reaction? They just go and like do Israel or what? So, and then suddenly I started looking into that, and I figured out that that this actually happened, but it wasn't a story that was told, neither on the Jewish side nor on the German side. Why? Because it doesn't fit the roles for both sides. The Jewish side finds itself to be like more comfortable in the situation of the victim that doesn't have any kind of bad feelings about that, just the victim. And then the German side doesn't really want to tell about angry Jews, because that isn't really a nice story to tell if your aim is to kind of always retell the story of slow reconciliation, which obviously is bullshit. So you like And then what I felt like was that this perspective opened up for a different subject position for me as a Jew in the present. A subject position that allowed me to react to the constant projection of desire from a dominant German side to talk about anti-Semitism, Shoah, and Israel, and to say, okay, look, I'm done with explaining stuff, and I'm done with saying, hey, we do not rule the world. Like, sorry, like the whole idea of Jews ruling the world is
I
anti-Semitic.
love being part of a conspiracy theory,
Exactly, and this is exactly that.
I'll take it.
It's exactly that.
We
Amazing
rule
if
that. We do.
If we had that
We're behind it
agency.
all.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Wonderful.
we're behind it.
And I think that's one of the most, like, this is one of the twists, right? Not to explain how things really are, but to say, look, you're afraid of Jews ruling the world because they do. And that's it, like, they do. And this is opening up a full door to do different arts, because suddenly you get out of this idea of explaining stuff. And obviously you start working the audience differently, but also working with a different audience. And that was something that needed Maxim Gorky Theater and its post-migrant impulse to kind of even like ignite the idea that there could be a different audience with different ears that would make it possible to kind of refuse that interaction and to say, look, if we're going to be your Jews, we're going to be a part of defining what Jews we are. And if we have to be your Jews, you're going to be our potatoes. And this is how it's going to go. Dann seid ihr unsere Kartoffeln.
Yeah, I just want to say, I feel like this is really complex, though, right? To be anti-colonial and to be anti-patriarchal and to be anti-racist and to be anti-ableist means actually not to dominate and to not see the idea of, say, revenge or what it would mean to feel, I would say, vindicated. Does that make sense? Yeah? Whenever I say like certain English words, it's like I don't expect everybody to get exactly that thing. And because a lot of the times with German, I'm smiling and nodding, and I'm just like, I believe you. But I feel like it's very important to me not to replicate the harm. And actually, like as survivors of harm, that we deeply know that, and so it's about being able to create a different system entirely, where no one is dominating that system. And as much as, I play with revenge fantasies in my shows, it's a show and a fantasy, but I don't feel like the ability to exact cruelty or to really say like I dominate you is satisfying. Actually, as much as I might joke about that, that's not my vision.
I find that very tricky. I mean, I'm totally with you there. And as I said, I prefer to look for the beauty and not so much for the revenge. But on the other hand, of course, I'm constantly struggling with this fact that, the other side, the side that is already dominant, they always want us to play that soft and nice role. They always want, all these accusations against, Black Lives Matter activists are too aggressive, the angry black woman, that kind of stuff. Nowadays, trans activists are apparently too aggressive in dealing with J.K. Rowling, for example. It's constantly, we always are told, we're given these examples of Martin Luther King Jr. and Gandhi, who allegedly were also soft and nice and, and nonviolent. And so this discourse also gets so easily appropriated by people who want to silence us.
I remember, sorry, Perel, when we were preparing, like you coming to Hamburg, you told me something about your show that was, well, I'm doing this American late night talk show about the systemic murder of disabled people during the Holocaust, and non-Jewish German people are so shocked by what I do and tell me how to speak about Jewish life and the Holocaust all the time. So maybe could you develop a little bit on your like your take on humor and reappropriation of the narrative, and like who is the stage director of not only your show but also how to narrate your history, and like who is speaking.
Yeah, I actually think that word reappropriation might connect us all more in what we are saying, actually. Because I think there's a difference between violence and domination. I feel like violence itself is a multivalent reality that isn't just about an aggressor and a victim ever. It's about so many other things. I mean, when you talk about Martin Luther King, okay, one could say that he was nonviolent, but he also put himself in the face of lots of violence. So it's not that he was on the side of like attacking, but he was on the side of resistance to a degree of facing incredible physical harm. So I feel like it's not black and white in that way to me. Like, yeah, and I always think about resistance inside of. I think I have a lot of value placed on risk and how I risk myself, not how I risk myself for others all the time. And in my work, I think about how what I'm saying is putting myself at risk, but for the cause of something much greater. So people actually know about things that they wouldn't know about, right? But that goes into like being able to reappropriate a narrative that's been taken away from you and been instrumentalized to reify a power structure. And you can't do that without being an asshole. And so I'll always be an asshole, but I'm going to be the best asshole ever, ever. I'm going to be an asshole mensch, but mensch like Yiddish, not like German. You know what I mean? And like, I'll always have to do both better in order to fight what is necessary, I think.
Max, I was really interested in the passage in your book where you speak about the function of art, and you really kind of go against this image that is quite popular of the innocence of art, in a way that art would also like always be a democratic or a critic tool of society. And you really go into an analysis of how art has been used at service of nationalist or racist ideologies and systems. And part of these artworks are comfortably sitting right now in the German Leitkultur canon, right? While other pieces of arts and marginalized voices are not really entering this kind of transfer of knowledge. I think you speak about it as an archive of artistic and voices of resistance. And I think it would be interesting to hear from you a little bit, like, what is this archive and why is it so important to you?
Thank you. I think I was mentioning Adorno before, and he was giving this speech on how the Germans after 45 were starting to look for the great German culture, right? To find something positive to relate to in order to reinvent something like a German identity. And that is something that has kind of lingered on until the present day, that you find this differentiation of the good art and the bad politics. Also in the past, bad folkish politics, good German art. And that is something that just doesn't work if you look at the history, because art has had an integral function in producing something like the idea of German nationalism. Am deutschen Wesen soll die ganze Welt genesen is a sentence that only makes sense if you consider it in the framework of German culture being dominant and more successful than every other national culture. So there's a very strong connection that you can also find in writings of romantic writers and all that. So you have this connection, but you have a present and cultural functionaries in the present that refuse that connection. So we would be talking about, is there, like, this is Hamburg, so we talk about an anti-Semitic a satire coming from Vienna, and the one side says, yes, it's anti-Semitic, the other side says, well, that should be covered by freedom of art, and the third side says, it's not even legit to ask this question. And this third side is ridiculous, because this doesn't make any sense. Art without any connection to society makes it superfluous. There's really no meaning in art anymore if you say there's no connection to society, and it couldn't. But if there's a connection to society, it should also be treated with the same tools you use for the critique of society, obviously, because we know there's anti-Semitism in art. Obviously, we know there's ableism in art. I mean, we know this stuff is going on. We know there's racism in art. Why? Like, where's the split of consciousness that is kind of putting the good art on the one side, and everything else has been treated as singular case, Einzelfall, right? So you find the same thing you find with Nazis in Germany with art, that is being treated as Einzelfall, even though it's a structure, obviously, because it's a symptom of society. So, and then what I'm proposing is an idea of wehrhafte Kunst. It's coming from an English expression, militant democracy. So it's militant art that is saying, look, wait, if we do not use art as a tool and a necessary point to build a positive German identity on, then suddenly we will be able to see that art has been used all along as an instrument of resistance. And this is true for Jews, this is true for women, this is true for all kinds of groups that have been excluded from society. And Jews, if you remember, until, let's say, the 60s maybe, they were not part of the German canon. They have become part of the German canon. Now suddenly it looks like they've always been there, which is true because they have always been there, but they haven't been considered as proper parts of German Leitkultur, obviously. And now suddenly you find Heinrich Heine alongside someone like Richard Wagner, which is insane. I mean, Wagner was an anti-Semite, and he would have loved to push Heine out of the country, which in a way he did. So now wehrhafte Poesie would mean to take a different look, a different take on this canon, and to kind of reestablish something like an alternative canon that is understanding art as a practice of resistance, as a means to stay different, and to kind of save Heine from the Germans, if you want so.
Well, then we'll wait, because I also feel like fuck a canon. I mean, the people you named are men. Yeah? And like, yeah, great, the pride of Germany. Men. Yeah, that changes everything. Even if we're going to talk about, I feel like I just, I have to say that my friend who's in the audience, who came here as my assistant, is the person who has discussed this with me so much, who happens to be a man, and I feel like it's really exciting and wonderful, because I think I don't think we need to invite or accept others into a canon. I think actually we do not need a canon. We need some other form that isn't even about that word inclusion, which I fucking hate. Because for me, inclusion has furthered my career by making me a token in a late capitalist system that doesn't actually support people like me, honestly. So I feel like there needs to be something that is not a canon and that is created by the people who have been excluded. I'm just saying, I'm putting it out there, like, what could it be? I don't know. But again, it's like I just kind of want to usurp the idea of domination, usurp the idea that inclusion could mean everybody is happy inside of the same structure, meaning the canon, right? Because I actually think that any marginalized person knows that survival actually means working outside of the system, to get what you need. So then why all of a sudden is it like, oh, now I really want to be in the system, be this thing in the system? For me, that's very hard. That's an issue I always have, a question.
It's a very good question. I mean, I feel we always live in a relationship with the system, of course, and we would like the system to be better, and even if just for the nice purpose that maybe younger generations growing up with our issues would have it easier than we do. I mean, what is a canon? A canon is a very lofty idea of education. It's something that after long period of going to school and studying, you are supposed to deal with it at some point, and then you can call yourself an educated person if you've read all the, for example, all the books in the Reich-Ranitzky Literaturkanon. But the problem of cultural inclusivity starts much earlier. You know, it starts already in the kindergarten. It starts in primary school, and how we constantly construct culture and are told about culture. And we have, especially here in Germany, we have issues all over the world, and certainly the US has enough issues, and other European countries have enough issues. But we still have a very, völkisch, what we call völkisch in German, a very basic racist view of what makes a real German, and it's still transported already in the primary school system and from then on. I think we need to teach young people, first of all, to deconstruct culture, to deconstruct these lineal views of history. These, I mean, you presented it very flippantly in that Jewish news trailer, but these, I mean, yeah, no, Berlin is not built on Dönerspieße, yes, but the Germanic runes actually are related to Phoenician script and to Hebrew script and so on and so on. So there is a lot in history that's about connection and about hybridity, and we don't talk about these things even on the very, very basic level of educating children, for example. We are still told, if you look at German school books, for example, you still have these stories of German the Hermann, you know, Arminius fighting the Romans. And that's insane, actually. That's insane if at the same time we tell the story of oh, but we are now different. We are not falling back on these old nationalism.
I totally agree. I think something canon, I mean, that's already a term I'd use in an art intervention. That'd be like Jewish-Muslim Leitkultur, hegemonic culture. It's about claiming there's this culture but while knowing that once you got more than one hegemonic culture, the idea of hegemonic culture disappears, because it kind of, but it's, again, it's not saying, look, the German Leitkultur doesn't really work as a term, but you're saying yes, and our Leitkultur is even more powerful than yours. It's like taking it a bit further.
So did I misunderstand
No,
you when
no, no,
I
no.
said fuck a canon?
No, you're right on that level. I'm totally with you.
Okay.
It's more like I think a term I should have used would have been archive, and that would have been much easier. Like, I think there would have been less wouldn't have cost that. But I'm thankful for that loop, because in a way, something that you just said. The Jewish Museum in Berlin, which is the biggest in Germany, just opened a new exhibition. I don't know if you've seen it, but the new permanent exhibition is open now. And it continues, and it takes pride in telling this story as a story of German-Jewish relations. And I'm just now preparing an exhibition on Jewish revenge for the Jewish Museum in Frankfurt am Main for next year. And I find myself wondering about why minority stories are being always told with regard to the dominant culture. Why is that always the story you tell? There's 1,700 years of Jewish life in Germany. There's so much to be told besides its connection or non-connection, or being persecuted or not persecuted by the Germans and by the surrounding culture, which wasn't even German in the beginning. So why is that the story we always tell? And there's so much stuff we lose. And once we start looking at Jewish history in a different way, we start seeing Jewish-Muslim interactions, but they take place outside of the German-Jewish relations. And this is why you have to change your perspective in order to see stuff. This is how theory, or the way you kind of construct your own idea of history, is going to influence the stuff you're going to find. And this is I think something that this tries to do. It's trying to say, look, like, we have already changed society. Maybe we are much further than we thought, but the political concepts do not follow. And we need to change the concepts, because if we don't, we're going to lose that again. Because the right wing is so strong in working on those German concepts, they're going to be even stronger. So we have to change concepts now in order to see how the radical diversity of society is actually building up the strength and the resistance we're going to have to use in order to fight that off. So that is the more serious undertone of that.
Yeah.
And it is also a really great proposition for a strategy I was going to ask for. I would like to maybe come back to what you read before we started the discussion about a dominant culture instrumentalizing two or more marginalized groups against each other. In this case, a so-called Muslim culture, which is being instrumentalized and blamed for anti-Semitism in Germany, which is obviously ridiculous, but also for sexism, homophobia, transphobia. So I'm happy that you just put forward this strategy. Maybe do you also have strategies for what maybe you would call in your book this complex intersectionality of empathy in fights that might differ, but have like the potential for strong alliances? How would you go in that fight?
I think I don't have a strategy. I just go with it very organically. But it's just, I find it very interesting that, I mean, you just mentioned this instrumentalization of Muslim culture in that context, or I'm the Muslim on the panel here, and I'm also the transgender woman on the panel here, and I find it quite interesting how often people, due to this position that I have, often somehow automatically in the mainstream discourse place me as some kind of a good Muslim, you know, because as a transgender woman, I'm of course naturally opposed to all these crazy fundamentalists, and I'm probably very happy that I'm living in a society like Germany where I can express my sexuality and all of that shit. And just by constantly being present in that position that is constantly appropriated by the mainstream, and at the same time making clear with all I do, all I teach, whether in public or in workshops or classes, that I am not there for you to be used in this kind of appropriation. That is my way, my strategy, if you want so, of resistance, you know, to constantly just be present in that way, and yeah, and just, you know, just show people how ridiculous these constructions are that they constantly make, or these kind of projections they constantly project on me as a person.
Mm-hmm. I don't know if you want to speak about the COVID-19 virus tonight. If you would like to, we can also address the question of solidarity and limited solidarity. That has been a question that you address in your book. And I think that is also relevant for all of us present here, because I feel like there is some high visibility of some groups in the corona pandemic, and a lot of invisibility for different groups. So, and also this is touching political issues that we were already discussing, like the racist attacks in Hanau, of course, and different like fascist and racist things that would deserve the same state of emergency that Corona has provoked, like that society really comes to a stop and really takes measures to change the situation. But it's also a question of ableism, of course. And I wanted to ask you if you would like to discuss these complex contexts as maybe the last question and open up a little conversation on that.
Yeah, I feel like when from the beginning of the pandemic to now, my compassion for non-disabled people has like been reduced and reduced and reduced. If I have to hear another non-disabled person talk about vulnerability and ask me if I can like talk to them about what vulnerability means, or now what it means for a non-disabled person to feel what it feels like to be vulnerable, I'm gonna stick my cane in your eye, and that will be revenge. And we'll have to deal with the aftermath of that. I don't know if there's such a thing as a reverse hate crime, but that's what that would be. So that's the limit of my patience for this like complete lack of awareness around what disabled people have been navigating our whole lives. And that is an integral part of who we are as we live and as we are at the highest risk. And within that structure, you know, when I speaking about disabled, high-risk populations, excuse my stuttering, being back and forth with German and English, it does a lot, I think, as we all know, with our minds, and it just kind of makes me start to stutter. Because it's like I'm pretending in one part of my brain that I'm speaking German, which I know, it doesn't make sense. I feel like we should all speak what we speak. I'll just speak Yiddish this whole time, and you'll understand me perfectly. I feel like I just need to interject this, just like every time when I try to speak German, it sounds like Yiddish because that's like what I know, and then people always like laugh and they're like, "That's so cute, you're trying," but I'm like, well, that's what you think, but actually, I'm speaking in a whole other dialect, which we could talk about some other time. But I feel like vulnerability and ableism is about classism and racism implicitly, actually, as well. That in disability justice, these aspects of reality are included in it. And these have been solidarity movements in America since the 70s and onward. So, and especially for disabled activists, solidarity with other activists has been the way that we've all been able to make change. So it's this thing where I feel like staying safe during this pandemic should be an act of solidarity and acknowledgement in a way, instead of this bullshit, vulnerability thing, as if you and your super special, pure, non-disabled life is threatened. Cry me your ableist tears, people. Come on.
I, I relate so much to that, actually, on a different level, of course. But I mean, there has been so much talk in the media about how, you know, how people are struggling now mentally and their mental health and all of that. And I'm like, Jesus, I've been struggling with depression and anxiety for, I guess, probably the last 40 years, you know, like from my earliest memories on. And it just, when I read these kind of lines, I could just explode, you know. And there is my, you know, I said I don't want revenge, I want to look for the beauty. No, in that moment, I am also there where you are, totally. And another thing also that has made me so mad is this, you know, this thing about the masks and covering yourself and all of that. And of course, here in Germany, we've had, in all of Europe, we've had throughout the last few years constantly this debate around the burqa and the niqab and Muslim women covering their face and so on and so on, and how bad that is. Actually, at the beginning of this year, we had one debate like that. Um, and politicians said, no, in this society, you have to show your face. And now we are suddenly at a totally different point where you have to cover your face, which I think is actually good. We should take care. But you know, just the hypocrisy of that whole debate and how easily it gets, derailed is just ridiculous, and it makes me also angry. And also actually, so many people were complaining about, you can't, now when you go outside and you have to wear a mask, you can't smile anymore and all of that, and you're not that visible anymore, blah, blah, blah. I have to say, I've been struggling with this topic of not always wanting to be visible all my life. I've actually been going through phases where I would have loved to wear a burqa or a niqab, because I feel so constantly vulnerable to the stares of people, the judgment of people, people looking at me on the bus, on the train, trying to find out whether I'm a man or a woman or what am I, you know? And there's such violence in all these gazes, and that's experiencing that all the time, every day. I guess that contributes to the 40 years of depression and anxiety, you know? And just actually being able to go outside and not being recognized immediately is brilliant. I love it, actually. I do.
Thank you for those perspectives. I really, I'd like to, I think something that I'd like to do also in my book and also my work is to be able to have those perspectives and to have them there as strong as possible, and just giving another perspective that I found interesting, and that was in a situation of Hanau and Halle, where the attacks had happened and had shown very clearly what people are being protected in society and how people are not being protected in society, and how Corona had even proven that point by saying, look, once the right people are threatened, we're going to do a shutdown. I'm like, wow, okay, wait a moment. That means we didn't lack ability, we just lacked will. I mean, that is horrible. Think about that. That really sunk in for me. And now,
Can I interrupt you?
Yeah.
Because what also made me very angry at that point was that all this talk throughout the years about wir müssen die besorgten Bürger ernst nehmen, taking the worries of the citizens seriously, and now with Corona, we constantly have this media discourse of, no, we have to counter these conspiracy theories, we have to counter this and that. Why did we not have to counter all these racist conspiracy theories?
Yeah. Right. Again, totally right. The point I'm trying to get at, though, is that at the same time the shutdown did something to me, and I know it did something to other people that we just accepted, and that was that the national framework of the German state is going to guarantee you a certain health treatment, for example, and you are going to be a part of that. If you have a German passport, you're going to be a part of that. Some less, some more, but still, there's a certain privilege that comes with being in Germany right now, which, and this is now where I find it very, very demanding or interesting or complex. This is where the idea of complex intersectionality comes into play. How do you deal with the simultaneous situation of on the one hand being privileged and being discriminated? How do you deal with that, and on a conceptual level? What do you do with that? If you know your brothers and sisters have just been killed in an attack, and at the same time you know there's a certain complicity with a certain system that is treating you different than people on the European border. And how do you deal with that? And I think something that I feel is, or something that I find is a lack of conceptualization of privilege as also a resource for action or for agency. Because I feel like, for example, if something happens like the Unteilbar demonstration where 500,000 people get to the streets, you got to explain that. Why is that actually possible? And obviously, it has to do with people having a German passport, not being afraid to be put into a jail right that second. And it has to do with people combining their forces, not because all of them are discriminated, but because they want something, which is a society that discriminates less. So suddenly, you find a situation where the question of positionality and the question of intention becomes both a factor in talking about something like political movement or allyship. And that, I think, is something that has taken identity politics, like it's accepting, or it's taking the great gains that identity politics has meant, but also asking for the, let's say, potential for great alliances that could open up once you move to a position of intention and not only of position.
It's true. I feel it's difficult, this protest with the idea that that means marching in the streets. You brought up some aspects of identity that would make it at risk to be able to demonstrate in that way. And it's the same for disabled people as well. You know all of the marches that happened in the States these months. And I was back in New York at that time, and I was able to go to a protest because it was the Dyke March. There are lots of different marches historically in New York. And the Dyke March is one of the oldest marches. And they have provided wheelchairs because they're one of the oldest, and because they get solidarity. So I was able to get into a wheelchair, have someone push me, and we all wore masks, and we did it. And that meant that I could be included in this resistance in this way. But even for myself, I felt like I was in a privileged place not to be at risk, so much so for my health that I couldn't do it. Whereas the people that I was marching for are people who would really not be able to be part of a mass march in that way because of their health, but who need to be known and to be fought for. And so it's about who leads these marches, and also ways of leading that don't have to do with physically having to be there. Like, there has to be a way to empower those who are not going to be able to do it in that one way.
I thought of the season opening that was happening here 2 years ago, and Paul Preciado was here. And he said something that still gives me goosebumps when I think about it. He was saying, I know it's super hard, I know it's difficult, I know the fights have been ongoing, and it feels like a long way still to go. And he said, it feels that way because we were in the middle of a revolution. It's that hard because things are changing right now. can you work with that? Do you relate to that? Do you think things are especially hard right now? I mean, I'm asking this in the middle of a global pandemic, so it's maybe a little bit difficult than 2 years ago. But I was thinking of that when I was thinking about our panel discussion, actually.
Okay, this may sound a little bit counterintuitive, but I sometimes think that actually a little bit less optimism would do us good. So we have been fed this narrative of progress for ages and been told that everything gets better and, you know, and things will always be just more amazing in the future. And I'm not really sure whether that helped us. I'm a big fan of the apocalypse. And I say that as a religious person as well. As a Muslim, I do not necessarily expect the world to get better. I don't. Not by, you know, not by human power, definitely not. But that only means that our individual struggles and our tries of still creating islands of beauty, you know, the art that we do, the educational work that we do, it just gets more important through that perspective, and it just has more value. And yeah, I think this is what we should focus on. Just, you know, individually focusing on the beauty that we can create and the justice that we can create. But I don't see the revolution happening tomorrow. I don't see that. I see the Antichrist coming.
Perel, I would like to give you the last word, so let me reply, and then I would like to hear your thoughts on that. I'm from East Germany. As you may or may not know, I was born in the East, and my family's from the East. And one story that always strikes me is my mom telling me that in March of 1989, as you may know, in November the wall came down. In March, nobody would even fathom that something like this would happen, that this state would crumble this quick, and would crumble this like in this way. And I always feel like the presence, the stuff you perceive, has a tendency to tell you that it's without any alternative, and it has a tendency to tell you it's going to last forever. This is how it works. This is how ideology works, and presence is always an ideology. It always tells you stuff is not changeable in a profound way. And I think the experience of 89 is an experience that shows you that stuff can change very rapidly. And even though that you don't know how and where it's going to change, I think you got to prepare your actions in a way that they work towards something that you want to change. And that, I think, is where we meet, right? This is where we meet. This idea of hopeless poetics, the poetics of hopelessness, to say we have to do this because stuff can change, and just because trotzdem, despite, is such an important word for that, just because you have to do it. And then maybe you're going to be a part of that rupture, of that change that's going to come without you even expecting it.
Max, holy shit. Oh, that was so beautiful. If you would have told me in my lifetime, facing the anti-Semitism that I faced growing up in the United States as like the only Jew in a small town, and the way I was raised to assimilate, I'm like so emotional right now. But instead of crying, I just feel like my head's gonna like pop out of my body. If anyone would have told me when I was a kid, a child, that I would meet you, and I feel like I would have imagined somebody like hurting me before I would imagine getting here and meeting you. So the revolution in that way has just been ongoing. And I feel like the fact that we're here means something is real. And but I feel like I guess maybe from an American perspective, like the thing that bothers me about being American and what I was taught about change is that it should happen fast, you know. But that's also a lie. It's like a lie that that we tell ourselves. Because if we really looked at the face of the United States, if we really looked at its history, if we really looked at the number of people who've been massacred and oppressed, we wouldn't be able to have a national identity. So we just look at civil rights, we look at the past 30 years or 40 years, and we think, oh, great, we're doing it. You know, and then Trump's in office, and we're like, oh, you know, we never saw that, or we didn't know. But it's like, no, that has always been here. And it was always being here. And we still need to be doing the work, and that will never change. And I actually feel like, you know, from the way that I learned how to be Jewish, or what it meant to be that, is that, you know, you fight anyway. Whether you're going to see that now or you'll never see it. But you're definitely going to die fighting. You're not going to be like, oh, it's too hard. I won't get to see that in my lifetime, or it's not happening fast enough. So, you know, poor me. Like that kind of self-pity is like out of the question, you know? And you actually said this earlier, Leyla. You said it that we do it because we want future generations not to have to fight so hard. Right, so I'll fight as hard as I can now. And I feel like in the US, what I've seen happening with disability is beyond what I imagined 20 years ago could happen. And so I feel like it's happening, but it's happening because we, like those from the margins, are making that happen. And we always have, and we will continue to make that happen. While everybody, all of the lazy people in the mainstream will cry like, oh, poor us.
Well, thank you so much. I won't add anything to these brilliant minds and guests. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge, your experience, your emotions, and everything you've brought to this stage today. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.